mentor of mine who was actually the pastor at the church when I got saved in high school. And he was a teaching pastor, looked up to his leadership for a really long time. And I'm really excited to share this interview with you. We're going to be talking about a book that he's written. He's written many books. We're going to talk about one of them today. So Chris, thank you for joining us today. We're just so grateful for you to have you here.
Awesome. Awesome. No, it's great to be with you. Thank you, Ryan, and really proud of you, man. It's been amazing to see what God's done in your life and the leader that God's allowed you to become. So it's amazing. And that doesn't happen by accident. Leadership is not by accident. It's by purpose. And you've definitely grown as a leader. So it's awesome. It's an honor to be here, man. Hang out with you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So, okay, so let's jump back in. I was in high school, gave my life to the Lord. I didn't grow up in church really, gave my life to the Lord. And you were one of the teaching pastors, and you felt called to start a church. And, back then I didn't really know what that meant, but I watched you lead and start in your living room. And now you've got multiple campuses doing great stuff. So let's take us back to there and just kind of walk us through kind of a quick journey of the church and how you started and kind of where you're at now.
Yeah, no, that was a long time ago. We started SouthHills Church, and we were in Whittier, California, and then felt go over to Corona. I had roots here. I didn't have influence, but so I knew I'd have to start from nothing. I was a youth pastor. Well, actually, I was only a junior high pastor or a youth pastor or something. So I never spoke in front of people. So I came back, got permission from the Assemblies of God, it's a denomination I belong to, and got permission from the people in the area and said, I want to plant a church. And we'll see what happens. But it was a huge, there was a lot of faith. I remember the night they threw a little going away party for me at the church in Whittier. And I remember getting in my little car, and I remember putting my 3-year-old in the front seat or a 2-year-old in the back or whatever it was. I don't remember, but I just remember getting in the car and thinking, what in the world am I doing? I don't know I don't know what's going to go on. I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. Like, what the heck am I thinking? I got a wife, and I'm like, oh dear God. And so I thought, well, we just feel called to
and for those that are listening right now, this is long before we had great organizations.
Oh yeah.
ARC and CMN and all these great. This was like straight, pure pioneer days.
There's no money. Yeah, this business of, you raise 50 and we'll give you $100,000 and you can pay it off over the next 7,000 years. And like, that did not exist.
Yeah.
We got nothing. And,
you may have gotten a handshake and a hug maybe.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. I always say that we got a hunting license. Go ahead, hunt away. We're not going to give you ammunition, but hunt away. Yeah. And so I remember specifically, I had $5,000 in our savings account, my wife and I. And I remember the first call we got, some lady says, hey, we used to have a church and then we don't have a church anymore. But we have some equipment. I went and picked up like 4 microphones, no joke, a couple old broken down cords, 2 speakers, 1 monitor, a 6-channel board. And I was like, okay, well, we got that, and we'll start with that. And it just was literally from nothing. And so we had a few friends that said they would help us, maybe 6 or 8, something like that. And we just started meeting for about 6 months with a core group, built that up to about, 40, 50, and then launched. And we had to figure out how to make money. We raised money, raised our support, felt like a missionary, wasn't no ARC, wasn't no CMN, nothing like that. So we raised a bunch of money. The biggest gift we got, I think, was like $1,500 from somebody. A church, a religious organization, like a church or a denomination, gave us like $1,500. I don't remember who it was. But outside of that, there was nothing. And we just trusted God, and did the best that we could. Took a lot of work. And 2 things I always say about church planning, no matter how you slice it, you need money and you need people. And, there's a lot more to it, but you better have some money and you better have some people.
So how long ago was that?
Gosh, it was 20 years ago.
20. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's fast forward. You obviously were a single location church, and then now would you say 11?
Yeah, I think we're about to launch. I think we'll do the math here. We're about to launch our 12th. Yeah, in Idaho.
Wow.
Eagle, Idaho.
Yeah. And so talking about that's nationwide. That's not just in Southern California, right?
Yeah, that's correct. We're different places. Yeah.
So is that, do you guys have like different levels of campuses, or are they all like actual campuses where you're all teaching the same thing, using the same resources, or are they kind of more independent?
No, they're all branded as one church, many campuses, that whole thing. And so they follow the same, the children's is branded this way, the youth is branded this way, uh, everybody follows the same series. We do live speaking. We don't do video venue. So everything we do is live, which is good, but it definitely has its
Yeah.
challenges. It's definitely pros and cons to video versus live. But anyway, yeah. So we're live, and we're all branded the same.
That's great. So talk about just maybe a couple tips that you've learned over the years on keeping churches, 11 campuses around the nation, kind of on the same page. What are a couple of tips? Because I know that multi-site churches are always trying to figure out how do we keep everyone united? How do we keep people on the same page? What are a couple of tips that you'd say to people that are thinking about going multi-site, or maybe have started it and trying to figure that out?
Well, going multi-site, I think there's a lot of things that you have to consider. I think you have to make sure that it's something you feel God's calling you to do. That it's not just because it's cool. Like, how many sites do you have? We don't even talk attendance anymore among pastors. We talk, how many sites do you have?
Yeah.
The more sites you have, the better you must be. So, and that's, obviously false and fake, but I think that you got to really make sure that you want to do it and that you can do it and that God's called you to do it. Secondly, you got to make sure that the mothership is ready. I always say unhealthy parents usually don't have healthy children. So you got to make sure that they're ready. You have to know, I think you need to have your strategy. It needs to be duplicatable. I think that's a big issue, because the more campuses you get, the more complex communication becomes and the more complex the organization becomes. So you say, well, we went from 2 to 4. It's only 2 more campuses. I'm like, yeah, but it's a lot more communication that's starting to happen and a lot more complexity that's starting to happen. So you have to be very clear. In absence of clarity, people will arrive to their own conclusion. So being clear on, hey, this is who we are. This is how we do children's. This is how we do check-in for children's. This is how we do youth. This is how we do worship. This is what we do. This is how we do it. I mean, you got some freedoms there because you're not creating robots, but you got to say, it's kind of like a McDonald's. It's like, no, you're not just going to make the Big Mac however you want. You're going to make it the way we tell you to make it. And that we're protecting the brand. And so having those strategies in place, I would say one of the things that I've noticed with churches that we coach, because we have a coaching organization as well, when they're wanting to go to 2 sites, 3 sites, 4 sites, whatever, the one thing that seems to be least prepared for, 2 things actually: the financial implications. They're not ready for it. They don't understand it. And secondly, they're not duplicatable. You have to be duplicatable. And they're not. In many cases, it's kind of ambiguous. Like, we kind of do greeting this way. No, this is how you do it. And so those financial implications and being duplicatable. I think there's areas where you really have to consider as you look at it, and make sure that it's not about ego, that it's about, hey, we really feel like we can do this and we're called to do it.
Yeah, I like that idea of really having to drill down into, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is really every area. I mean, even as simple as, this is how we do greeting and this is how we do guest receptions or whatever like that. And not only this is kind of what we do, but actually really nailing down, this is exactly how we do it. And so that's tough.
It is.
So any tips on churches on kind of how to maybe think through some of those processes?
Yeah, because duplicatability is not just how we do it, it's the culture in which it's done. And it's different. It's like, I always say, it's like going to McDonald's versus going to Chick-fil-A. It's a totally different experience. I mean, at Chick-fil-A, it's like, how can we serve you? It's a pleasure. At McDonald's, it's like, what are you doing here? It's just, get out, for smoking a cigarette. They're putting it out in the French fries. No, but if anybody here is watching this from McDonald's, are probably gonna be mad. But it's just different. The culture is totally different. And I think that when you're duplicating out, here's a couple things that I think are important. Number one, you have to be you have to be clear. Well, a few things. You have to be clear on your values, which help shape the culture. A lot of people confuse aspirational values with either core values or accidental values, and those are all different. But you have to be really clear on, like, what are your core values? You know, what are your aspirational values? And then always a great question is, what's your accidental values? But you got to be clear on your values, you're clear on your culture. And then physically, here's the homework. Like I did with a church that was now is at 5 sites, and they were at 1 3 years ago. And they brought me in to do coaching for like 6 months. So I went to the youth pastor, children's pastor, worship pastor, guest services, blah, blah, blah. It's a big, they're already a church of like 3,000. And I said, everybody, we need job descriptions for everything. We need how-to guides for everything. I want it all in writing. And they're wanting me to coach them. And they're like, why? And I said, because just telling someone, just have a good children's department over there 10 miles away. What does a good one mean? Just make it safe. What are the standards of safe? You know, it's like telling a teenager, just be home early. Well, my opinion of early and my teenager's opinion of early might be different. Well, I think it's the same thing with the church. It's like, just greet people and be nice. What does greet people and be nice mean? It's got to pass a paper test. It's got to be like, this is our manual. Not that I think creating a bunch of manuals is going to fix everything, but it's got to be something that says, okay, all 4 campuses, here's how we do guest services. Let's all look at it together. Now you got to reinforce it and you got to teach it, but it's got to be in a place where it's like, this is how we do it. It's not ambiguous. And that's what we do. Just make it safe. Just make the worship good. What does good mean? What does safe mean? Very different from people's opinions. So you got to get really crystal clear. And like I said, in absence of clarity, people arrive at their own conclusions. So it's like, just be safe. Well, if you don't tell them, they have a version. Just do good worship. Well, if you don't tell them, they'll have a version. In absence of clarity, to me. They'll come up with it, and it won't be what you hope. It will never be what you want. So anyway, those are some of the things. I think it's like physically saying all the job descriptions, all the how-tos, all the minute, everything. This is our thing. This is how we do youth. This is how we do children. This is how we do whatever, worship, whatever.
You feel like that's important for a single location church as well?
I do. I think it's important. Well, no matter what, I think it's important for sure, because I think it helps create the guides and it helps create expectations for your greeters, for your ushers, for your worship team. And it forces, even though it's a necessary evil where you're sitting there doing all this typing, everybody at the end of it, all the tons of churches we worked with, at the end of it, they always say, that was a great exercise, because it forced me to think through, how do we really do this? What is it that's really important to us? How do we want them to behave? How do we want them to act? What do we want them to value? Like, what's the profile we're looking for of a greeter, usher, worship, whatever? So even as a mono site, I think it's definitely a great exercise. It forces clarity.
Yeah, I think, every restaurant talks about like that secret sauce. What's that secret sauce that makes your restaurant better? I think that, it could be, I feel like what you're saying is a lot of that is really helping people to unearth their own secret sauce as to why their church maybe is a little bit unique or different, right?
Yep, it does. It forces clarity. It forces you to really think about a lot of things, and it takes you into a pattern of figuring out what we're good at, what we're not good at, why we do things the way we do, what's successful, what's not successful, what does good mean, what does safe mean. It forces it, and I think it's great for mono, I think it's great for mono site. It's has to happen for multi-site if you're going to keep everybody in alignment, because here's the thing, man, is that I always say that vision leaks and people drift. And so vision's always leaking, so you got to always be restoring it, but people will always drift. So you got to always bring them back to, like, this is who we are. Remember, you guys, remember this piece of paper? This is who we are, and because they will drift, I always talk about Mount Sinai when Moses said, I'll be back. And he comes back 45 days later. The people that loved Moses as their leader and loved God with all their heart, 45 days later, had built a golden calf. It took 45 days. No one ever really does the math. Whenever I teach that to pastors or leaders, they're like, I never thought about that. 45 days later. This is a group that was like, we love you, Pastor Moses. We love you, God. We're all in. Yahweh, the whole,
We'll do anything.
We'll do anything. We'll die for you. 45 days later, we built a camp. And so when I say,
and they're about to kill him too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, don't think that people aren't drifting. They're drifting quickly and vision's leaking quickly.
That's great. So, well, hey, Chris, you wrote a book, When Your Church Feels Stuck, and the 7 unavoidable questions every leader must ask. And great book, phenomenal content. And you walk through these 7 areas, these 7 questions that churches, leaders, really business leaders, church leaders, everyone should be asking themselves. And one of them is you really talk about mission. And so I think that everybody listening, everyone watching knows that mission is important, right? I mean, like, there's no one that really thinks that, oh, we shouldn't have a mission statement. That's like, everyone realizes that. But here's the question. Why do you think that it's so hard for people to have a clear, kind of coming back on what we just talked about, why is it so hard for them to have a clear mission statement?
That's a great question. I would tend to say, based on a lot of coaching that we've done, I don't think there's any deepness to what I'm about to say, but I think the reason that it's so difficult for them to come up with is because they still don't know what they're doing. They don't know what their clarity of their call is. Because most churches, here's the thing, right? Most churches think from top to bottom. They don't think from left to right. Top to bottom is, this is our church. We want to reach people for Jesus and disciple, for the kingdom or whatever. And then that's the top. And then at the bottom, they think of all these programs they do. Well, we do men's, women's, children's, this, that, ladies' tea, men's breakfast, got to have pancakes, all that stuff right there, all of that. Instead of saying, how do we actually move people from the community, the crowd, to the core? So because they don't think that way, they come up with this arbitrary mission statement, throw a bunch of programs at it, rather than saying, okay, the mission answers the what question, the strategy answers the how question. But before you're answering the how question, it's like, what is it that you really want to do? And back to your original question, why is it so difficult? I think there's a lot of leaders that are not really clear on what God's called them to do. Like, what has God actually called you to do? Now, I think a lot of the churches are going to go to the Great Commission, but I think there's some uniqueness to your call, whether that shows up in the mission statement or not. I think there's some things that have not shown up in our mission statement that God's called us to do, but I think a lot of it just comes down to pastors join the ministry, they become youth pastors, they go through the ranks, they become a lead pastor, they're not really taught this stuff, and at the end of the day, they are much more program driven than process driven. And so it's like, well, I'm a pastor and we put on Sunday services and a Bible study and small groups. And what are they saying? I have a bunch of staff, volunteer or not volunteer, that put on a bunch of programs versus like, but what is the one thing God's called you to do? What's the one thing that you could put all your energy to, that all your strength would go to, that all your hope would go to that, what's that one thing? And resources and all that. And I don't know if a lot of people have really thought that through. They've thought of all the programs they run, but I don't know if they've thought of, but what's the thing God's called you to do?
Yeah, it's tough because it sounds to me like there's times where maybe those programs don't match the mission. And so we might have to end those programs, right?
Absolutely. Well, in the book, I talk about 3 P's: personality, program, and process. So if you kind of build a triangle and you put at the bottom the word personality and then programs and at the very top process. So here's what I teach. Every church grows to the level of the pastor's personality. Average church in America is 86 people. I think it's only 5 or 4% that will ever get past 300, something like that. So what's the thing? Every church grows to the level of the pastor's personality. 50 people, 80 people, 120 people. Bigger personality might be able to do more, maybe more introvert does a little less, but it grows to the level of the pastor's personality. Out of desperation, they'll go from personality, and they always jump, when it gets stuck, they always jump to program. We just got to add more programs. We got to have something for the men, something for the women, program. You know that churches over 1,500 have less programs than churches under 500? Because out of desperation, when desperation rises, standards fall. So you go from personality to program. Like, okay, now we're just going to do all these programs and that'll answer the question. Very few make the leap to the top part of that triangle where the word process appears. Like, okay, but how are you going to actually do it? We want to reach unchurched people and make disciples, but how? Well, we're going to do that through men's and women's. That doesn't answer how. Those are programs. Some are good. Some probably, like you said, need to be, out. But how are you actually going to do it? How are you going to get people from the community to come to the crowd on Sunday morning to the core? Like, how are you going to actually do that? And most people can't answer the how question. If I'm in front of 500 pastors, I'm like, how many got a mission statement? Most of them have something somewhere on a wall somewhere they all forgot about, and they'll raise their hand. But then I said, but how do you actually do that? That not a lot of them can answer the how. At least it seems that way to me.
Wow.
They struggle with that.
So another one that you talk about is metrics. Yeah. And, I think that there's I could be wrong, but I feel like when you start talking about metrics, there's two sides of the table here. People that get excited, oh man, finally we're measuring, like, here it is. But then there's like this other side that I feel like almost gets a little defensive, a little bit upset of like, oh, you're focusing on, the wrong things, right? Like we should just, like you said, like we just love people and disciple people, but you said talk about metrics. And so, two questions for you here. Why are metrics so important? And then on the other side of that would be, what are some of the metrics that we should be focusing in on?
Yeah. Well, I would say metrics are important because they tell the truth. And that's probably why we try to avoid them. It's like the older you get, the less scales you want to step on. You don't want the truth. You don't want the truth. Like, man, I weighed that. In high school, I weighed, you don't want the truth. And I think metrics tell the truth. And I think that we, to some degree, want to avoid the truth. And so, excuse me, I think that there's I think that we just, we just avoid those metrics at times. I think that we do. I do think there is something, before I get into what kind of metrics, I do think there's something that's really fascinating. And I write about it in another book I have coming up, but I talk about this, that when the metrics aren't going well, we have a tendency in ministry to try to put a positive spin on negative data. Here's how it looks. Man, we're not growing, but man, our services, God's moving. Okay, but let's address why you're not going. Yeah, but God's moving. But let's address why you're not growing. There's a problem here. Okay, but we're not, but boy, we got this. We may not get this, but boy, we're strong like this. What they're really trying to do, and we're all guilty of it, is we put positive spins on negative data. And because we don't like the way the dashboard reads, because we don't like the way the metrics read, that we do that. And I think metrics tell the truth, and it's hard to face the truth. But I do think this, Brian, I think one of the biggest responsibilities a leader has is to identify reality. It's like, what's the truth here? Okay, even if your church is growing. I got a buddy of mine that his church has exploded, pre-COVID, it was just like out of control for like 2 years, and who knows how to all shape out, whatever. But I mean, it was like, whoa, it was growing like crazy. But he told me, in honesty, Chris, I don't think we're reaching the loss. I just think we're the best ticket in town. I like that. It's like, and he wrestled with that. He's like, we're not reaching the loss. We're just growing. Kingdom growth. It's transfer growth, not kingdom growth. And yeah, I was like, man, that's how you fix a problem. Identify the reality. That's leader's job, is to identify reality. And he's identifying a reality. And so I think you have to identify reality as a leader. So some of the metrics, we look at everything because I think it all plays a part. I think the natural thing is to look at money and people. And we do. Okay, what's the attendance like? We don't do it week to week. Try to do it over a period of a couple months. You do it week to week, you're going to kill yourself. Like, oh, we had a bad week. Everybody wants to go all nutsos. It's like, hang on. You have a bad couple months, that's different. You have a bad week, it's not the end of the world. Secondly is, I do think you look at money, but I think there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. Okay, well, yeah, we're bringing a lot of money, but how many new givers do you have? What's the depth of the giving? Is the majority of it coming from just 20% of the people? Or do you have because that's part of discipleship. How do you slice it? Money's part of discipleship. And if it's like, wow, we got a church of 5,000, but we still only have 600 people giving. Okay, reaching a lot of lost people, but there's somewhere they're going to have to start getting discipled along this path and become followers of Christ in that way. I do think you have to look at giving. I think you have to look at it but you have to look at it in different ways, not just bottom dollar. You got to look at how many first-time givers do you have? Do you have several every week? Do you have a wide span of giving? Those are things I think you have to look at to get the true reality of what's happening. Otherwise, you get a false sense of data. Like, oh, we got all this money. It's like, well, yeah, but you don't have a lot of discipleship, and you pretty much are getting it from 5% of the people. And if those 4 families leave, you're in a lot of trouble. I think you look at other discipleship components, whether your growth tracks are like small groups or serving or whatever. I think you have to look at those metrics. But I also think when you're looking at those metrics, I think you measure small groups, measure how many people are serving, measure how many new leaders you have, measure different components of giving, measure the attendance, look at those things, see if there's some health there. I think you also have to look at the data. I think metrics is also good. I don't think every week, but I think you talked about ending programs. I think there's a metric to look at. I think that there's natural energy and manufactured energy. And if you have a program that causes or takes manufactured energy, it might be a program that needs to end. So that's a one-time view of your programs. Like, we don't need that. We don't need that. We don't need that. This is what gives us our best results. I'd rather you do 5 things really good and get amazing results than 20 things okay. But anyway, those things, to the measuring, to the dashboard, those weekly things, I think are really worth looking at. And I think that they are, in the book, I talk about the fact that we have to deal with the reality of, like, where are things? 76% of all churches are in decline.
Wow.
76% of all churches are in decline. 200 churches shut down every Sunday.
Ugh.
It's astronomical. It's unbelievable. So if we have 200 per Sunday and 76 are in decline, that 200 per Sunday isn't going to stop anytime soon. And so it's a huge challenge. It's a whole issue that we have. We call it Church Rescue. It's part of our churchBOOM initiative. We do churchBOOM, but we do a thing called Church Rescue where we rescue churches that are dying. But
wow,
it's a big thing. It's a big thing. Anyway, I rambled enough on that one.
That's great. No, that's great stuff. Yeah. I could probably talk all day about it, but okay, so let's transition a little bit. So Chris, you've written multiple books. Okay. And I want to encourage everyone listening, watching, go get them. They're fantastic books. They're going to help you out. But just real quick, I want you to jump in, talk about some of your techniques, strategies that you've used to write these books, in terms of just even the confidence, the courage to write them, right? I mean, I know a lot of people listening have been thinking about writing a book. They've felt called to write a book, something like that, but maybe they've just been a little bit hesitant to do that. So just give us a couple thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of thoughts there, but I'll give you the highlighted ones. I got really challenged years ago by my personal coach, Dan Ryland, who told me, you need to write your first book. And then he gave me a line. He goes, it'll be your best business card ever. And I was like, oh yeah. He goes, it'll just help you. It'll help your influence. It'll help your impact. And I think books have a way of moving you, from being more of a, not just a legacy, but someone that leaves a legacy and has that legacy because now your stuff's in writing. But anyway, each book's has got better. I think you learn and you grow from them. And I look back on other books and going, oh, I would have said that. I would have changed that. I would, but you grow and you learn more stuff and you're like, oh man, I heard Maxwell talk about, man, he goes, he said one time, we have a partnership with him in churchBOOM. And I remember him saying one time to a small, about 5 or 6 of us, he goes, I look at some of my older books and I'm embarrassed. I wish they would all just burn. He just like made some comment like, I'm embarrassed. He goes, this is why, I have way different thoughts now because you get bigger in your head, and not bigger in your head, but bigger in your thoughts and your concepts. Mm-hmm. Anyway, here's the bottom line. I think if you have a book inside of you, you need to follow that calling to write that book. I'll give you 2 minutes. Ready? Here it is. Number one is, if you have a book concept in your head, here's what I've learned from my publishers and my agents. It said this: Write your book in a sentence, write your book in a paragraph, write your book in 1 page. Sentence, paragraph, 1 page. Why is that? Because it hones in very fast. What is it that you're trying to get done in this book? In 1 sentence. 1 sentence. What are you trying to get done? 1 paragraph, 1 page.
Wow.
So that's the first thing that I do, is I start really getting focused. Like, this is what I really want. Force it back to that whole, kind of like with multi-site, forces you to get focused and clear. Same thing. Second thing, real quick. Once you get really clear, the thing that I do is I start outlining chapters. Like, what do I want to say? Is this an 8 or 10 or 12 chapter book? What do I want to say in each chapter? How do they flow? Then in each chapter, so I'll say chapter 1's called whatever, and then I'll write a paragraph or a paragraph and a half for every chapter to give me the idea. This is what I want to accomplish in this chapter. This is what I want to accomplish in this chapter. This is what I want to accomplish in this chapter. Next thing I do, third thing, I pull out physical file folders. That's just the way I like doing it, physical. And I start downloading through research and through my own thoughts, everything I could think of on that chapter, every stat, every quote, every theory, every philosophy, everything. So, and I do that for every single chapter. So I take the head chapter title. Now I got a paragraph. Now I'm going to take a file folder and dump it with a bunch of physical papers of everything I could think of about that chapter and everything I could think about that chapter. Now, when I do that for all 10 chapters, then I go back, pull out chapter 1, open it up. There's 11 pages there. I know what I want to write. I got all my research. Now I start writing. And that's how I do it. That's what I've learned to do by other guys. Much better than me.
That was incredible. That was good. So, Chris, you've mentioned it, John Maxwell. I know you've spent a lot of time with Sam Chan as well. You got partnerships with him as well. You've spoke for conferences like Xerox, all kinds. So you've spent a lot of time with some of the top leaders in our nation, as well as pastors around the nation of all sizes. What are some of those common traits or habits that you've seen in some of those top leaders in our nation?
Yeah, great question. And the very number one thing that comes to my mind is hunger. I'm always, I shouldn't be, but I'm unpleasantly amazed how much little passion is inside of a lot of pastors. Here's the thing that the average pastor in America reads 0.75% of a book per year. That's less than 1 book per year. Why someone doesn't have a coach is beyond me. I have 3: spiritual coach, organizational coach, and leadership coach. 3. When am I going to not have a coach? Never. Because I always got to get better. If you don't have a coach, hit us up at churchBOOM, whatever. If you don't want that, get something else. Not talking about some guy that asks you if you're praying. That's a spiritual mentor. That's great. I'm talking about a guy that says, let's talk about your church. Let's talk about how to grow it. Let's talk about your leadership skills. Let's talk about how you handle conflict. How do you raise up volunteers? How do you work with the staff? How do you attract high-level leaders? I'm amazed how much guys don't have coaches and aren't hungry and growing, reading less than 1 book a year. They're just not growing.
Wow.
And they're not developing. So the thing that I see with high-level leaders is they have an incredible appetite for growth and development. And those that don't seem to have the success they would like, I always tell them, I'm like, dude, you got to read, you got to grow, you got to get coached, you got to develop. I always, it's a Brad Lomenick thing. I always tease Brad because I'm like, dude, I had those H's in my head before you wrote the book H3. But I love Brad. He's awesome. But he
went to market first. He wrote it.
Yeah. See, he went to market first. I was writing some other book that didn't do as good as his. He's awesome. He's the best. You don't have H3, you need to get it. Brad's the best. But I always say, man, you got to stay hungry, you got to stay humble, and you got to hustle. And I genuinely think that what Brad says in his book, what I've always taught, what I tell staff members, is like, here's the thing. You got to be hungry and humble enough to know you don't have the answers, to get the help, to get the coaching. I'm always floored. about what people do, and then hustle enough to go and get it. So, I guess I could go all day long with 6 or 7 other traits, but the number one trait is, I just think that one thing I think I said in the book I wrote called In Search of Higher Ground, I said, the thing that separates the good from the great, the thing that separates successful people from unsuccessful people, it comes down to one thing: habits. And this is what I say in the book: successful people are simply willing to do the things unsuccessful people won't. It
Wow.
doesn't make them smarter. Here's the thing, Ryan, and I mean this with all my heart. I am not that smart. I am not that clever. I am not that brilliant. I am not that naturally creative. I am not that naturally anything. There are other guys I look at and I'm like, dude, you just wake up creative. You wake up this way. You wake up with those thoughts and you're just brilliant. Yeah. I have had to sweat and bleed for everything that I've learned, every book that I've wrote, everything that I learned, because here's the thing. I don't know if I know that I am not as naturally talented as most people, but you will not out hustle me. I will read, for every book you read, I'll read 2. For every coaching session you get, I'll get 2. Now, I'm not naturally whatever, but I'm telling you, I will outwork you and I will figure this thing out. So I am not, if I can write a book, anybody can write a book. And I'm not that smart, man. I'm just not. I don't mean that to be some false humility. That's just the honest to God truth. I've had to work and sweat and bleed to come up with concepts and ideas and learn and pay a lot of money to a lot of coaches and a lot of flights, fly to Atlanta. Never forget. That's how I met Mark Cole, the president of John Maxwell. I said, would you give me a lunch with me? Flew all the way to Atlanta from Southern California, had lunch with him, got right back on the plane. I paid for it out of my own pocket, $1,000 round trip ticket, so I could have a 90-minute lunch with the guy. But if you got something to say to me, I want to learn it. And I'm telling you, anybody that's watching, listening, or however you're putting this thing out, Ryan, read, listen to podcasts, listen to Ryan's podcast, get some help, get the coaching, go, whatever you got to do, but be hungry. I asked John Maxwell one time, because his hand is in the corporate world as much as in the Christian world, probably like no other Christian leader in the world right now. I asked him this question at breakfast, me and him sitting there, just me and him. I said, what's the difference between corporate leaders and Christian leaders like pastors? What's the difference between the two? He didn't even blink, Ryan. He looked at just me and John Maxwell, and he looked at me, and this is what he said to me. He goes, corporate leaders are much more hungrier than pastors. He said they have a greater passion for their cause than we have for ours. He goes, not even close. And he says that, and obviously he's the guru. And in my own world, I've seen the same thing. It's like, wow, I do some corporate speaking, and I'm like, man, they're passionate about selling phones at Verizon or wherever I speak, selling lumber at Home Depot. I've spoken for Home Depot several times. And then I turn around and I watch a guy that can't even get on a coaching call, doesn't get the coach. And I'm like, but our message is way more important than lumber and cell phones. It's the gospel and our passion to grow and get better. I could go all day on it. I'm so passionate about why we're not doing that as pastors.
Wow. Couple tips for those meetings. I want to have a lunch with somebody like that. What are some tips when you get that meeting? What are obviously you can't just fly to Atlanta to meet with Mark and then not be prepared and just show up and say, hey, let's hang out. So what are some tips for that, getting prepared and getting the most out of that 90 minutes?
Yeah, I've done a lot of that, 90 minutes. I've done a lot of 20-minute phone calls. I've gotten hold of leaders and just said, look, dude, I'll take 20 minutes of your time. And I literally look at the clock the entire time. I'm like, so the biggest thing I do, 2 biggest things. Number one is I protect their time. I value it. I show them I value it. And I'm telling you, leaders that tell you they'll give you 20, they'll give you 40, but let them give that to you. Just be like, hey, 20 minutes are up. Thanks so much for your time. It's been amazing talking to you on the phone or whatever, The other thing is be prepared. Have great questions. Don't have low-level questions. Have some people help you with the questions. I've had people get time with me, and sometimes I'm like, dude, there's so many other people can answer this. It's very low-level questions like, you might want to ask a higher-level question. And so Whenever I'm in front of someone big, I literally text out to about 10 pastors. I'm going to be sitting with this guy next Friday. I got 40 minutes. What would you ask him? And boom, they send it back. I'd ask this, I'd ask this. And I look at I literally have all these people help me prepare 5 or 6 questions. And I go in, I go, okay, I got 30 minutes. I got 5 questions. Here we go. And I protect their time. And I let them know that, hey, I got some questions, and I show them that I value it, and I come with high-level questions almost every time.
I love it.
They'll give you a little more time, and they'll be like, hey, call me up. Let's do this again. Because they won't. And I'll prove it to you right now. Ready? Here's how I'm going to prove it. If you have a pencil or a pen in your hand, and you are listening or watching this, my personal cell phone number is 951-415-7444. 951-415-7444. That's this phone right here that I'm showing on the screen. Now let's see how many people call, and I'm always floating. Dude, I'll speak at an arena. I did it for ARC. There was tons of people in the room, you know, pastors everywhere. 4, 5, you know, and it's not just me. Man, I talk to other leaders. They're like, oh yeah, give your number to 50 pastors. You'd be lucky if one calls. And I'm like, dude, if Larry Osborne gives you his number, which he gave me his number, I was like, that's the biggest mistake Larry ever made. Because I was like, all right, dude, where do you live? I've been to his house. Literally, I've been to his house. I've been in his backyard. I sat with just me and him, 10 o'clock at night, sitting there, you know. And why? Because he gave me the number. And I was like, all right, dude, here we go, man. I want information. And I'm just always floored that people don't take advantage of it. It's just amazing to me.
That's incredible.
Learn.
I love it. All right,
Yeah.
Chris, last question here.
Yes, sir.
What is bringing you renewal in your life? I know you've got coaches. One of those is a spiritual coach, you know, church coach, all that kind of stuff. But what are some things that are bringing you personal renewal right now?
Well, my daughter's going to have a baby. That's pretty exciting, which is crazy to even think that way. But that's on a personal level. On a kind of a ministry level, probably Larry Osborne more than once has called me Barnabas, which I don't like because it sounds like a weak leader. I mean, I want to be known as Paul or David or something, Gideon, not Barnabas. You know, first of all, you know, I mean, I don't even want the name, but secondly, it's like, I go, why is that? And I can't remember exactly how he said it, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he just said, you're a cheerleader to every pastor, whether they have 20 people in their church or 20,000, you're a cheerleader. And I really feel that. And what brings me renewal on the ministry is watching everybody else win. I really, genuinely, from the depth of my heart, like to watch people win. So even if it's a guy that's like, man, dude, we've been stuck at 70 forever, and he breaks 100. That's amazing. That's awesome. I mean, some pastors that might be listening and thinking, 100? Yeah, but when you've been at 70 for 5 years and you finally broke 100, that's victory. And that's a good victory. And that guy needs to be celebrated. And now his confidence level goes through the roof. He's all excited. He's fired up. The 150 becomes so easy because he was able to break something that he never was able to break before. I like to watch people win, whether that's 70 to 100 or whether that's 2,000 to 4,000. Doesn't matter. I like watching people win. I like watching people say they're going to write a book and write it. I'm helping several guys write books right now. I just like whatever it is. I just like watching people win. And the wind in my sail always is other people's victories.
I love it. I love it. Well, hey, Chris, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
Such an encouraging word today. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's been awesome. It's been a pleasure.